There's one very big reason to buy into a third Giannis MVP season this upcoming year. Camille and I tell you why and take a look at the construction of this somewhat finalized Bucks roster next.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, each and every day. All the viewers on YouTube as well. We've seen some massive numbers so far this summer. Camille, it's interesting what an active offseason can do for you. So thanks to all the everydayers on YouTube as well. You can, of course, hear me throughout the season on the Bucks Radio Network. You can hear Camille year-round on the Locked On NBA show and the Technical Foul podcast as well. So one big reason to buy into the Giannis MVP talk. Well, I don't know if the talk is there, so we're going to start it now. And that is the roster around him. So what we plan on doing today, and we kind of did this earlier, like we'll be upfront with you. We know we did this once before this offseason. The roster has changed since then. Who's going to be the second leading scorer on this team? So you look at the construction of things. You look at what the Bucks are seemingly leaning into with their style of play, things that we talked about. Doc Rivers kind of, at least in his in-game interview on NBA TV during the Summer League, confirmed as well. That to me is the big piece. It is going to be everything running through point Giannis. And not only that, Camille, when I look at this roster, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I don't think there's a 20-point scorer outside of Giannis. I think you're going to see a lot of guys in that like 15 to 18 range. I don't necessarily know anybody's hitting 20 points per game. And if we just look back at what we referenced last season, those final 8 games where Giannis went man on fire mode and just took over, he averaged, if we round up, 32 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 12 assists per game. Mm-hmm. And did that while shooting 61% from the floor, 42% on threes, and 73% at the free throw line. Like, that is the case study. And that is the project. Here's our assignment we're turning in. Here's how we make Giannis the MVP.
I definitely see that coming as well. I mean, I think for an MVP outside of the numbers, there has to be some narrative involved into it as well.
Like doubts in a team and reshaping the roster.
Exactly. A Milwaukee team that national pundits don't seem to be very high on at the moment. So if this is a season where Giannis comes out and he's averaging big numbers like that while shooting at a level of efficiency the NBA has not seen from a 30-point per game scorer in the history of the game, you add that on with the assist numbers ticking up. If the Bucks make a push and it's all centered around Giannis with the ball in his hand, with him running point, like the narrative is there to add to the fuel of what his numbers already show us, which is that he is one of the best players in the world. So that piece of it is exciting for me. And I think that's the vision going forward of like, hey, Giannis, when we talked about what the pitches look like we're going to put the ball in your hand a lot. We know that the ultimate goal for you is championship, and that's what we're trying to get to. But along the way there with this new play style, another MVP might be in your future if you can buy into what we're trying to do here. And as we've talked about throughout the summer with the will he stay, won't he stay situation, all signs are pointing to Giannis being in Milwaukee for this upcoming season, at least for the start of it. We all know things can change, but I do think that there's a really strong case for Giannis to be a dark horse MVP favorite if the Bucks are able to be like a top 4 seed in the East along the way. And with the shooters he has around him, which I understand Doc's enthusiasm about some of the guys he named as possible breakout candidates, you can see the pathway there because guys got to knock down their shots, play that defense, and you can be on to something.
Yeah, I mean, the only player that averaged more assists per game than Giannis in that stretch was Trae Young, who was at an even 12. Giannis was at 11.8. If we look at the total assist numbers, and Giannis didn't play in all 8 of those games either. Mm-hmm. So extremely small sample size theater that we're dealing with here, but Giannis was 4th in assists during that stretch. I think that's obviously the recipe here, and it kind of brings us to the makeup of this team and how much they're going to lean into that. You know, we've said play everything through Giannis, let him be the point, play faster. Those are two things that Doc Rivers echoed in his in-game interview during the first Summer League game of the season. If we look at the lineups where I think the most optimized, we obviously don't have any data on what we assume this year's most optimized lineup will be with Giannis playing next to Miles Turner, but the most optimized from a year ago was Giannis, Gary Trent Jr., AJ Green, and Kevin Porter Jr. Put together that fifth piece, kind of, a rover there that you could mix and match a number of people. Again, small sample size because we did not really see that until the final 6 games that Giannis played in with that group. But in those lineups, the Bucks were a plus 42.4 net rating. They were a 138.8 offensive rating. And more importantly, Camille, a 96.4 defensive rating. They were in the 100th percentile in offensive efficiency, effective field goal percentage, turnover rate in terms of how much they were turning it over, and free throw rate, how frequently they were getting to the free throw line. They were in the 100th percentile in defensive efficiency, in opponent's effective field goal percentage, and the 99th percentile in defensive rebounding rate. So again, small sample size, but we've seen enough to know, hey, this group works. So let's see even more of it. Now, who's the fifth piece this year? Obviously, it's Miles Turner. And, even those 3 guys together with Giannis is probably going to change a bit with the rest of this roster and some other pieces that you've brought in. But just looking at those 4 together, again, Giannis, Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., and AJ Green. We saw a handful of other guys as the fifth, Kyle Kuzma, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Taurean Prince. Those were the only other players that rounded out that 5-man lineup with those 4 guys. There are 2 players where the other 4, how good they were, didn't matter. The Bucks still had a negative net rating. Would you care to guess who those 2 were?
Out of the other guys you just named here?
Kuzma, Connaughton, Taurean Prince, and Bobby Portis.
I'm going to guess Kuz and Taurean Prince.
Wow, you nailed it, Camille. Kuzma was pretty close to flat. -6 net rating, and they were really good defensively. It was just surprise, the offense and the fit of Giannis next to Kyle Kuzma. So again, you don't have a huge sample size there, and I don't know that we're going to see a ton of that with Taurean Prince included too, or Kyle Kuzma. I mean, that's the best part of this is the Bobby Portis next to Giannis lineup was the one that we saw the most, and that was a plus 54.6. So in theory, you still have looks you can do where you say, well, Giannis, Bobby Portis, and Miles Turner. Like, I do wonder how many times we'll see that, depending on matchup, with 2 of those guys in the backcourt. Because, the other important part about the Miles Turner acquisition is how much conversation was there for the past few years around playing smaller and that being the versatility piece. But I think what we've started to see here is it's been back to the future where teams are leaning into going big. And if you're the Bucks, that's where you feel great about coming into the season, especially with what we talked about on yesterday's show of, the Bucks are still kicking the tires on Al Horford too.
Yeah. And I mean, with that, the ability to play the double big looks, to your point, I do think it's coming somewhat back into style a bit. Even look at the Thunder and them rolling out Chet with Isaiah Hartenstein, where it's like, okay, you got a double big rotation that you can go to, but you don't have to always resort to it, which I think is the key point of having the roster flexibility to throw out different looks depending on what's needed for you in that moment. And the Bucks have that ability. I just hope that, regular season is a time to try things out, experiment, figure it out. And we saw the Bucks last year lean into wanting to play like these jumbo lineups, which is part of why, Taurean Prince was regulated to playing the two, which, as we've talked about, I don't think necessarily is the best fit for him. So I'm all here for the experimentation of lineups during the regular season, but I do hope that once we get to, March and April of the season, we kind of have an understanding of which ones work, what doesn't work, and we're not trying to put circles into square pegs just out of the principle of like, we're playing big. We're leaning into this because if you're seeing that it doesn't work, it's foolish to continue to lean into that. And I say that again to say Torian Prince is not a 2. So when we are thinking about jumbo lineups and whatnot, I just hope that's not a direction the Bucks go into. But would be interested to see the Giannis, Bobby Portis, Miles Turner look just to see what it can do in certain situations.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing too, is the jumbo lineups and the double bigs. You need to have different options to go to. Like it can't just be, I hesitate to even use the words because I know it'll trigger a lot of Bucks fans, but we have an older, plodding, slower, big, and we got Giannis to make up for it. Like you'd love to have that because again, Miles Turner is closer to that than he is a Jericho Sims type, but we have that and we have a younger piece as well that we can play and Giannis and Bobby Portis. So we just have these different looks that we can throw out there at you, which again, kind of feels like that would be Al Horford if that were to come to fruition for this Bucks team. An interesting question I have for you about Giannis. We'll get into that. And then now, feeling like we know what this roster is and any other moves that would be incoming, I don't think would disrupt this conversation. Who is the second leading scorer on this team is currently constructed? We'll get into those conversations next. Time to talk to you about our friends over at Monarch Money. And look, if you felt like managing your money gets difficult, you need it to be easier. Well, it can be with Monarch Money. Whether you're growing your savings account or planning on a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Want to know how much you're putting out there on subscriptions or food deliveries? Monarch Money can easily do that for you. If you share your finances with someone, Monarch Money can help both of you stay on the same page. And if you got a big trip you're planning for, big purchase, a car, a home, you name it, well, Monarch Money can help you get serious about that goal. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, Camille, the question that I have for you. Giannis's career high in scoring is 31.1 points per game. His career high in assists is 6.5, which he set in each of the last 2 seasons. So everything we just discussed and looking at this roster, what is more likely this season? That I'm not going to take the cop out and say it's more assists or more points. Let's put numbers on this. So what's more likely? Giannis averages 33 points per game, or Giannis averages 8 assists per game.
I think both things are actually very likely this upcoming season, which again adds fuel to the MVP dark horse conversation for Giannis. But I'm going to actually lean to the 8 assists
That's where I would go to,
because with him having the ball in his hands more often and actually operating as the point guard for the team, we know Giannis likes to pass. Giannis has talked about how he thinks his passing is a bit underrated, generally speaking, when it comes to people dissecting his game and what he's good at, what he can do. And I can definitely see that assist number ticking up for him with the shooters that they have around him, and with him just having more opportunity to facilitate the offense.
Yeah, I would go there too. because of what you touched on. The ball's going to be in his hands more, and I do think there's going to be more possessions, and the Bucks are going to play at a higher pace this year too, which you could use to say, well, it's more opportunity to score more, but they've done a tremendous job of filling the roster out with shooters around Giannis. And again, Miles Turner had a better shooting season than Brook Lopez last year. So the last few years for that matter. So the shooting is there around him. And I mean, once you start to get into the mid 30s for point production on an average, like you're really doing something special there. So I would say 8 assists as well. And, to tie that together, part of the how many assists you're going to average is who else in your team is going to score.
Mm-hmm.
So as we look at the roster here, we feel like we know the starting lineup. We think we at least know 4/5 of it. I still think small forward is up in the air. A little bit of pushback on one of the more recent shows we did of some people saying, hey, it's clearly going to be Kyle Kuzma. We'll wait and see there. But we know who the main characters are with this group.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, no Damian Lillard, no Drew Holiday, no Chris Middleton. That massively changes things. So who is positioned to be the second leading scorer on this now maybe at least near finalized Bucks team?
There's a few options on the table when you really think about who could be that second leading scorer for the Bucks. I think initially you're going to go towards a guard, right? So you have Gary Trent Jr., you have Kevin Porter Jr. Those are great options. You can even throw AJ Green out there as a guy of just like he could be. Bobby Portis is somebody you could throw off the bench of like, well, we know he can score, but how many opportunities will he have to be a second leading scorer if he's coming off the bench? And with the Miles Turner acquisition, it feels like Bobby's back settling into that role that he has been playing throughout his time here in Milwaukee, which is that super six man for the Bucks. So I would take Bobby off that short list and really look at Gary Trent Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., AJ Green, a bit of like, which of you three could really be the one to pop? And when you look at what they've done before in their past, we know that Kevin Porter Jr. has had a season where he averaged almost 20 points a game in Houston when he had a chance to have the ball in his hands, shot like 15 times a game back in Houston when he did that. But ultimately, I think it's Gary Trent Jr. As the guy who projects to be the second option for this team, assuming that he is a starting shooting guard on this team and not playing the bench role that we saw him play for a majority of the year last year, but rather see him in a role more similar to what we saw when he was starting next to Giannis without Dame being in the lineup. I believe the highest he scored points per game in the season is a little bit over 18. Yeah. So like he took a little bit over 15 shots a game himself. And we saw him average a little over 18 points throughout this Bucks playoff run in a role that I think will be more similar to what we'll see this upcoming season. His ability to create his own shots in addition to be able to get really hot with the catch and shoot threes in situations when he's playing next to Giannis. I think everything is in alignment for Gary Trent Jr. to be that guy. But I will say that I think that the Bucks this upcoming season, you'll look at the roster at the end of the year and see the raw numbers of like this guy ended up being the second leading option. But I think it's going to be a lot more of a committee approach where certain games it's Gary Trent Jr. One game it could be AJ Green because he got really hot. It could be Kevin Porter. I think it will vary, but I think the baseline for the Bucks has to be not only like who is the second leading scorer, but can we get at least 7-8 guys averaging double-digit scoring on this team going forward?
Yeah, I think they're going to have a number of guys that are scoring like 15 to 19 points per game, and then you're going to have Giannis that's over 30 again. Gary Trent Jr. is interesting because he is on the John Horst special. I think we have to term it after this offseason on the 1+1. So if he is their second leading scorer, and we heard Doc Rivers advocate for, I think he's going to have a breakout. I think AJ Green's going to have a breakout. Let's say Gary Trent Jr. is far and away their second leading scorer and the clear number 2 option and puts up a career best 20 points per game. What does that mean for that player option next year and the interest that other teams are going to have in him once again? Or I mean, look, I suppose the other side of the coin is I found success in Milwaukee. I'm really thriving in this role. I'm still young. I'd like to be here, and let's make it work long term here. So that is one of the more interesting things to tie into all of this. But I'm gonna stick with one of the juniors as well. I think it's Kevin Porter Jr. That's going to be the number 2 scorer on this team, because I think outside of Giannis, he's going to have the ball in his hands the most. He is, I think, I don't know if you can even argue against it, very likely the second most talented player on this team.
That's fair.
His career best was 19 points per game, just over 19 points per game, and that was his final season with the Rockets in 22-23. The interesting thing about Kevin Porter Jr. is that season had his second lowest usage rate outside of his rookie year. And that's when he popped off the most. He was at a 28% usage rate last year with the Bucks. I think it's you know what? It's actually going to take a dip downward, I would assume, because he's going to have more time on the floor with Giannis. But this was the guy that oftentimes was the straw stirring the drink down the stretch for the Bucks outside of Giannis. I just think talent-wise and having the ball in his hands as much as I think we all project him to, some of the bursts that we saw that he can, you blink and Kevin Porter Jr.'s put up 10 points. I think that's the guy. And I think it's interesting that, we're having this discussion over who is the number 2 scorer on this team, and neither of us brought up the big free agent signing. I think Miles Turner is going to be in that range that we previously discussed. Like, his career best is 18 with the Pacers. I think that's right around where he's going to be as a career 36% three-point shooter. Has taken about 11 field goal attempts per game the past few years. Maybe he gets a little bit more than that, but that was a career high in just under 12. So again, it doesn't say anything about, well, is that who you should have signed your money on? It's just more speaks to this a different construction of this team than we've seen since, quite frankly, the Bucks have not been a competitive team, where it's okay, let's see who emerges from this group.
Yeah, it is. And I think the Miles Turner point's a good one. And when I think of like second option, it normally makes me think of like who can go and create their own shot. And Miles Turner has a little bit of that juice, especially like in the mid range. He can catch and shoot. We know he can knock down the three. But I think that's why I lean guard, one of the 2 juniors of Kevin Porter Jr. or Gary Trent Jr. because of ball in hand, ability to create off the dribble, get your shot. While Miles Turner can do a little bit of that, just not to the same level as those 2 guys. But again, I think this is going to be a roster where you have quite a few guys who are averaging double-figure points. Like AJ Green is somebody who we haven't talked a lot about this. Like, we've mentioned him by name, but he hasn't averaged, at least 10 points a game over his young career so far. And I think this is the year he finally does it. I want real big things from AJ Green this upcoming season, because we've seen he has an elite skill in shooting the ball. If there's a little bit more he can add to that with being able to relocate off one dribble, get another shot up, like the touch is so good. He can shoot it really quick in tight windows. AJ Green, I think, is going to be somebody who averages, 12, 13 points a game for this Bucks team after averaging, I think, like 7 or so the last couple of years.
7 last year. Yeah. And his per 36, his first 2 years in the league, it was 16 and 15. It dropped to 12 last year, but with no Dame and with, we think a pretty increased role for AJ Green, I think that number is going to be probably double what it was a year ago, that he's going to be in that like 14, 15 points per game range for the Bucks this upcoming season. So leave your thoughts on those 2 questions. Who is going to be the second leading scorer for the Bucks this season? And what is more likely, 8 assists per game from Giannis or 33 points per game? I do want to touch on one more thing, and that's what Doc Rivers had to say about 2 names that we already referenced. We'll get into that discussion coming up next. So this kind of ties into what we just talked about with AJ Green and Gary Trent Jr. And was it just those 2, or did he include Kevin Porter Jr.?
He said he thinks Kevin Porter Jr. is going to have the biggest breakout of the year. So he called out Gary Trent and AJ Green, saying they'll have big years, but he said Kevin Porter Jr. is the guy in particular he thinks going to have the biggest breakout.
Okay, so what does breakout mean for those guys? Like, what's the one thing you would look at and say that is a breakout season for Kevin Porter Jr.?
For Kevin Porter Jr. and thinking about his game, like we mentioned, he's somebody who's averaged, 19 points a game before in the past. I think for Kevin Porter Jr., because of things that Doc Rivers has said along the way here, he really wants Kevin Porter Jr. to play more like a point guard in the sense of like he said a little bit less dancing with the ball, a little less of the just dribbling to dribble, but more so being deliberate with his actions, setting up his teammates, utilizing drive and kick. So I think that's part of the growth for a breakout for Kevin Porter Jr., but also really knocking down the catch and shoot threes because it's an area we've seen him have some success with prior to his stop in Milwaukee. But while he was with the Clippers and whatnot, the numbers weren't looking all that great. But we saw him have a little bit of an uptick with that with the Bucks here. And he mentioned himself, Kevin Porter Jr., of like, I have to continue to work on my catch and shoot threes. Like, if he can be someone who can knock down the catch and shoot threes in addition to having good decision making, because we saw at times with him being a young guard that the decision making at times could be a little bit undesirable. So if he can make good decisions on the court, win the shoot, win the pass, setting up his teammates properly, like I think all that's in alignment for him to have a breakout year.
Yeah, and Doc did not mention this name with breakouts. Part of that is maybe because he technically wasn't under contract yet. But I do wonder about Ryan Rollins as well, because, if we look at the per 36 numbers for Ryan Rollins, and keep going back to that because the minutes are clearly going to increase for him, for Kevin Porter Jr., for AJ Green, for Gary Trent Jr. You don't have Damian Lillard anymore. And that's the group that you're going to lean into with having two of those guys on the floor, at least two of those guys on the floor at all times. The per 36 numbers for Ryan Rollins pop more than any other player on this team. Now, I wouldn't put him in front of Kevin Porter Jr. or Gary Trent because I still think KPJ is going to be your starting point guard, and that's going to limit a little bit of what Ryan Rollins can do. But Ryan Rollins was 15 points per 36 minutes last year. He was 22 his season with the Wizards, 20 in that split year with the Wizards and the Warriors, which very small sample size of, I think that was 12 games. But he proved to be a guy that has the intangibles, but more importantly, he was a great spot up knockdown shooter. And that is going to be an important component with Giannis where you're going to get those open looks. We talked about Cole Anthony doing the same from corners, and that is going to be something that pays off. Now, I think the biggest thing we need to see from the offense this year is movement off the ball. Yeah. Because with Giannis operating on the elbow, you can't get caught in just one guy sits in the corner, one guy's above the break, and you're just kind of waiting for Giannis to make a move. That's a little easier to defend. So you are going to need to see more off-ball movement, but I think Ryan Rollins does that pretty well. I think AJ Green does that pretty well. And I just feel like here I just said Kevin Porter Jr. is probably going to be the second leading scorer, but I think there's going to be a lot of nights where it's a Kevin Porter Jr. night. This one's a Ryan Rollins night. This one's back to KPJ for a couple of games. Here's a Ryan Rollins opportunity. And with Rollins, because of his skill set and versatility, I think that applies to, not only being the yin to KPJ's yang, but to Gary Trent, to AJ Green, that you can throw them out there in different lineups. And you could see all three of those guys, KPJ, Ryan Rollins, and one of those two guards on the floor at the same time.
I mean, we've talked about the Bucks' ability to play the jumbo lineups if they do, but they could also play some really interesting small lineups if they ever wanted to lean around a lineup with the four guards of your choosing, and then Giannis or whatever that big might be in that situation. Like, again, having the roster flexibility to throw out different things depending on what's in front of you is a key aspect of making a long run here down the stretch. So Yeah, I agree on, it could be a different guy every night. I think that is going to be the formula. A little bit more, I don't want to say it's because we got Miles Turner, but a little bit more Pacers, like in the sense of like it's a committee here. Like we all are understanding if we're open, we got to shoot. We got to be aggressive looking for our shot. Giannis is going to put us in good situations. So we got to take advantage of it. And I think that's the mentality that this team has to have going forward. And honestly, you mentioning Ryan Rollins made me think of like, we got to have an episode too where we just kind of talk about some guys who might not be getting a lot of attention, about what they can do for the team, but who we think can have sneaky big roles for the team. Because I understand the conversation even around like, should Rollins start or should it be Kevin Porter Jr. because of skill set, and what you can do with second units with one of them leading over the other. But I think that there are a lot of pieces on this team that make sense first and foremost, but that have skill sets that if they continue growing in their game, man, it can make the Bucks really dangerous.
Yeah, the Pacers, I was thinking the same thing. That's the interesting component because Indiana had 7 double-digit scores last season. And those were guys that were with the team year-round. The Bucks technically had 8.
Yeah, with
but
Middleton and
Chris Middleton was one of those. Kyle Kuzma, we didn't really see it in his Bucks tenure, but Kyle Kuzma was one of those. Kevin Porter Jr. came over after the trade deadline. So that's the caveat where I'd really view it and say the Bucks really had 6, and that was largely Giannis and Dame averaged 55 plus points per game. With Indiana, not only was it 7, but 20, 19, 16, 15, 12. Like it was pretty evenly distributed that I think that's going to be closer to what we're seeing here. Siakam and Halliburton averaged basically 39 points per game combined. Giannis is going to come close to that on his own. And then, as we said, I think you're going to see a lot of guys 18, 16, 14, 14 in that range for this group. So one other question to throw out to the audience too, and we can get into this on an upcoming show, but we touched on who's going to be the second leading scorer for this team and the question for fans to answer there. The other one, who's going to lead the bench in scoring, which is a much larger conversation to get into than in the final couple of minutes that we have here. But you're starting to get some clarity on that bench as well, where maybe it's Rollins, maybe it's KPJ, Bobby Portis, Cole Anthony, and his ability to score there as well. So you're starting to see a lot of different looks and a lot of different ways to play for this Bucks team. So leave your thoughts on all 3 of those. Leading scorer for the bench, second leading scorer for this team as a whole, and what is Giannis more likely to average, the 8 assists or the 33 points? We got one more Summer League game tonight. So tomorrow's show will be a recap of that one. We'll see if our number 1 son, Chris Livingston, can show out once more and maybe earn a 2-way spot and be the starting small forward on this team. Camille, who knows? But we'll break that one down on tomorrow's show. That'll do it for today. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.